She still remembered the way the rain tasted that night. Bitter, cold, like every tear she'd cried in the 10 years he'd been gone. Her name was Naledi, and this was the story of how she learned that some promises are kept in the cruelest ways possible, and some loves survive even when the world tries to bury them alive. It started when they were children. She was 12 years old, living in a small village nestled between the hills of northern Ghana, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as rain in the dry season. Her father owned the only grocery store for miles, which meant they had more than most, but not enough to be considered wealthy. They were comfortable, safe, ordinary. Tao was different. His mother, Abeni, worked as a housemaid for wealthy families in the neighboring town, sometimes traveling for weeks at a time to earn enough money to keep them fed. Tao would come to Naledi's father's store with his mother, carrying empty baskets that they'd fill with rice, flour, and whatever vegetables were cheapest that week. He was quiet, but his eyes were always moving, always noticing things. He noticed Naledi the first day he walked into that store. They became inseparable that summer. While other children played football in the dusty streets, Tao and Naledi would sit behind her house under an ancient baobab tree, drawing pictures in the dirt with sticks. He drew cities with tall buildings that touched the sky. She drew the mountains that surrounded their village, eternal and unchanging. He told her about his dreams of becoming someone important, someone who could buy his mother a real house with running water and electricity. She told him she didn't need to leave because everything she loved was right here. When they were 14, Tao carved their initials into the bark of that baobab tree. The letters were crooked and uneven, but to Naledi, they were the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He took her hand that day, his palm rough and calloused from helping his mother with odd jobs, and he made her a promise. "When I'm rich," he whispered, his voice cracking with the awkwardness of adolescence, "I'll build you a house with windows facing the mountains, and I'll marry you under this tree." Naledi smiled, squeezing his hand. "I don't need a house with fancy windows. I just need you to come back." "I promise," he said, and he pressed his forehead against hers. "No matter how long it takes, I'll come back for you." They created a secret handshake that day, something silly and uniquely theirs. And then when the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, he kissed her. It was clumsy and brief, but it sealed a promise that would haunt them both for the next decade. 4 years passed. They grew older, their love deepening from childhood innocence into something more profound. Tao was 18 when tragedy struck. His mother, Abeni, collapsed one morning while cleaning a wealthy family's home. By the time they got her to the hospital, it was too late. Heart failure, the doctors said. She'd been working herself to death for years, and her body had simply given up. Tao was devastated. With his mother gone, he had nothing tying him to the village except Naledi. And then, 3 days after the funeral, a man arrived. His name was Chuma, and he wore expensive clothes that looked out of place in their dusty village. He said he was a businessman from Accra, the capital city, and he'd heard about Tao's situation. He offered him a job, promising good wages and opportunities that didn't exist in their small corner of the world. Naledi watched the hope bloom in Tao's eyes, and her heart sank. She knew what was coming even before he said the words. They met under the baobab tree on a rainy evening, the kind of rain that came without warning and soaked everything in seconds. Tao held her close, his shirt already drenched, and she could feel him trembling. "I have to go," he said, his voice breaking. "This is my chance, Naledi. 2 years. Give me 2 years, and I'll come back with enough money to build us a real life." She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg him not to go. But she looked into his eyes and saw the desperation there, the need to prove himself, to honor his mother's memory by becoming someone she could be proud of. So instead, She reached into her pocket and pulled out the only valuable thing she owned, a silver compass that had belonged to her grandmother. "Take this," she whispered, pressing it into his palm, "so you can always find your way home." Tao kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her lips. And then he was gone, climbing onto a bus that disappeared into the rain and darkness, leaving Naledi standing alone under the tree they'd claimed as theirs. The first year was bearable. Tao called whenever he could, his voice crackling through bad phone connections as he told her about the city, about the job, about how he was saving every CD he earned. He wrote her letters, pages filled with promises and plans for their future. Naledi kept every single one, tying them with a ribbon and hiding them under her mattress where her father wouldn't find them. The second year was harder. The calls became less frequent. The letters slowed to a trickle. Naledi told herself he was just busy, that he was working hard to keep his promise. She visited the baobab tree every single day, running her fingers over their carved initials, willing him to remember. And then, 3 years after he left, a letter arrived. But it wasn't in Tao's handwriting. The words were typed, cold and impersonal. "I've found success here. Don't wait for me. Live your life. I'm sorry." Naledi read those words over and over until they blurred through her tears. The letter didn't sound like him. The words were wrong, too formal, too cruel. But what else could she think? He'd sent it, hadn't he? He'd made his choice. Her father found her crying under the baobab tree that night. He didn't say anything, just held her while she sobbed. The village began to whisper. "Poor Naledi," they said, abandoned by the boy who promised her the world. Over the following months, the whispers grew louder, more pitying. She learned to ignore them, throwing herself into helping her father run the store, trying to fill the hollow ache in her chest with work and routine. Then her father's heart started failing. The doctor said it was a genetic condition, something that had been building for years. The medication was expensive, far more than their store could afford. Naledi watched her father grow weaker, watched the light fade from his eyes, and felt utterly helpless. That's when Django appeared. He was a merchant from a neighboring town, wealthy and well-connected. He began visiting the store more frequently, always polite, always helpful. He offered to help pay for her father's medication, asking nothing in return. At least, not at first. The proposal came on a quiet evening. Django took Naledi aside and asked her to marry him. He promised to take care of her father, to give them both a comfortable life. He didn't claim to love her, which she appreciated in a twisted way. It was a transaction, clean and simple. Naledi almost said yes. She came so close. But every time she opened her mouth to accept, she'd see Tao's face in her mind, hear his promise echoing in her ears. So she kept delaying, kept making excuses, while her father's health continued to deteriorate. What Naledi didn't know was that Tao's life had become a living nightmare. Chuma, the businessman who'd promised him opportunity, wasn't a businessman at all. He ran an illegal operation in Accra, using desperate young men as cheap labor for construction projects that skirted every safety regulation. Tao's passport was confiscated his first day there. When he tried to leave, 2 men beat him so badly he couldn't walk for a week. He was trapped. For 3 years, Tao worked 16-hour days in brutal conditions, sleeping in overcrowded rooms with 20 other men, eating scraps and dreaming of home. He wrote letters to Naledi every single week, pouring his heart onto paper, telling her about the hell he was living through, begging her to wait for him. But Chuma intercepted every single letter. They were never sent. Instead, Chuma had one of his men forge a letter, the one that broke Naledi's heart. It served 2 purposes. It kept Tao isolated and broken, believing Naledi thought he'd abandoned her, and it ensured she wouldn't come looking for him. In his 4th year of captivity, Tao met another trapped worker named Kweku. Kweku had been there for 7 years and knew the system inside and out. Together they planned an escape. It took months of preparation, stealing small tools, memorizing guard patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. The night they ran, everything went wrong. They made it over the fence, but guards spotted them. In the chaos, Kweku was caught. Tao heard his friend's screams as he ran into the darkness, and the sound haunted him for years afterward. He later learned that Kweku had died from his injuries. Tao spent the next year living like a ghost, hiding in the slums of Accra, working under fake names, always looking over his shoulder. He was broken, traumatized, and had nothing to his name except the silver compass Naledi had given him. He'd kept it hidden for 5 years, and now it was his only connection to the life he'd lost. Then he met Femi, a retired police detective who ran a small community center for homeless youth. Femi saw something in Tao's eyes, recognized the look of a man running from something. Over time, Tao told him everything. Femi believed him. More than that, Femi knew about Chuma and his operation. He'd been trying to build a case against him for years, but never had enough evidence. "Help me take him down," Femi said, "and I'll help you get your life back." It took 3 more years. 3 years of Tao working legitimate construction jobs during the day and gathering evidence at night. He learned about the other men Chuma had trapped, documented the abuse, collected payroll records that proved the illegal operation, and slowly, painfully, he saved money. Not because he still believed he could be rich, but because he couldn't face Naledi with nothing. Pride and shame kept him in the city even after he was free. Finally, after 10 years, he had enough. Enough evidence to bury Chuma, enough money to hold his head up, enough courage to go home. He arrived at the village on a rainy night, driving a modest car he'd bought with his savings. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, more worn down. He drove straight to Naledi's house, and his heart nearly stopped. The house was lit up, filled with people dressed in somber clothes. His first thought was that she'd gotten married, that he was too late. He almost turned the car around, but something made him get out, made him walk toward the house on trembling legs. He stepped inside and immediately knew this wasn't a wedding. The atmosphere was wrong, heavy with grief rather than joy. And then he saw her. Naledi stood across the room, her back to him, wearing a simple white dress. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, her shoulders broader from years of work. She turned, and their eyes met. The room fell silent. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Naledi crossed the space between them in 3 strides and slapped him so hard his head snapped to the side. 10 years, she screamed, and her voice cracked with a decade of pain. You sent me that letter and disappeared. 10 years, Tao. He touched his burning cheek, tears already streaming down his face. What letter? Naledi, I never... Don't lie to me. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and thrust it at him. This letter. The one where you told me you'd found success, and I should move on. Tao took the paper with trembling hands. He read it once, twice, and his blood ran cold. This isn't my handwriting. Naledi, I swear on my mother's grave I never wrote this. Something fell from his jacket pocket then, hitting the floor with a soft clink. The silver compass. It had slipped out when he reached for the letter. Naledi stared at it, and her anger faltered. You kept it? Her voice was barely a whisper. Every single day, Tao said, picking it up and holding it out to her. It was the only thing that kept me sane. The only proof that you were real, that we were real. Django stepped forward from the crowd. He'd been helping Naledi arrange her father's funeral, playing the role of supportive friend. But when Tao mentioned Chuma's name while explaining what had happened to him, Django's face went pale. I know that name, someone in the crowd said. It was old Zola, the village elder. Chuma used to recruit young men from villages all over, promised them jobs. Most never came back. Tao's eyes narrowed as he looked at Django. Something about the man's fear triggered a memory. You, he said slowly. You were at Chuma's compound. I saw you there 5 years ago. You brought him documents. Django tried to deny it, but his voice shook. The truth came spilling out under the weight of 30 pairs of accusing eyes. He'd worked for Chuma as a courier. He'd been paid to deliver the fake letter to Naledi. He'd wanted her for himself and saw an opportunity to eliminate his competition. The room erupted. Men grabbed Django before he could run. Naledi stood frozen, her world tilting on its axis. Everything she'd believed for 10 years was a lie. Tao pulled a thick folder from his car. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, all the ones he'd written to Naledi that Chuma had intercepted. He'd found them during his evidence gathering, kept in a file like trophies of broken dreams. His hands shook as he gave them to her. I wrote you every week for 3 years, he said. I told you everything. About the beatings, about being trapped, about how much I missed you. I tried to come back, Naledi. I tried so many times. She opened the first letter and began to read. Her tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Each letter was filled with love and desperation, with promises and apologies. One from 7 years ago said, I heard your father is sick. I'm coming home. I don't care if I have nothing. You need me, and that's all that matters. But he'd never gotten the chance to send it. Another letter from just 2 years ago read, I'm gathering evidence against the man who kept me prisoner. When I finish this, when I make him pay for Kweku and everyone else he's hurt, I'm coming home. Wait for me, Naledi. Please wait for me. She read them all while the room watched in silence. When she finished, she looked up at Tao with eyes full of agony. Why didn't you come back sooner, even after you escaped? I had nothing, he said, his voice hollow. I promised you I'd return rich. I couldn't face you with empty hands. I spent 3 more years building evidence, working, saving, because I was too proud and too ashamed to come back as a failure. Naledi stood up, walked over to him, and said the words that shattered them both. My father died 3 days ago. He spent his last months asking for you, wondering why you never came. And you were alive. You were free, but you chose your pride over being here when we needed you most. The devastation on Tao's face was absolute. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I need you to leave, Naledi said quietly. I can't do this right now. Just go. Tao set the compass on the table and walked out into the rain. He drove to the baobab tree, or what was left of it. The tree had been cut down 2 years earlier to make way for a new road. All that remained was a stump. He knelt in the mud, found the piece of bark with their initials carved into it, and wept like a child. Back at the house, Naledi was alone with the letters. She read them again, more carefully this time. And then she found one that changed everything. It was dated 7 years ago, right after Tao had escaped. He'd written about trying to come home immediately, but getting stopped by Femi, who convinced him to help take down Chuma first. I can't just save myself and leave the others to suffer, he'd written. I have to make this right. It's what my mother would have wanted. It's what you would want, even if it means waiting longer. She realized then that he hadn't just been building wealth or nursing his pride. He'd been seeking justice, not just for himself but for everyone Chuma had destroyed. He'd sacrificed 3 more years of his life to be the kind of man who deserved her love. Naledi ran. She ran through the rain, through the dark streets, the letters clutched to her chest. The village followed her, understanding somehow where she was going. She found Tao at the remains of the baobab tree. He'd planted a new sapling next to the old stump and was sitting beside it in the mud. I can't bring back the years we lost, he said without looking up. But maybe we can grow something new. Naledi knelt beside him in the mud. I read all the letters. I know what you did. I know about Kweku, about Femi, about the evidence. You weren't just trying to get rich. You were trying to make things right. Your father, Tao choked out. I should have been here. I'll never forgive myself for that. He would have understood, Naledi said, taking his hand. He always said you were the bravest person he knew. He would have been proud that you fought back, that you helped others. They stayed there in the rain, holding each other while 10 years of pain slowly began to drain away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more tentative, more fragile. It was possibility. 6 months passed. Tao's evidence, combined with testimony from other survivors, brought down Chuma's entire operation. 15 men were freed. Chuma and his associates, including Jengo, went to prison. The news coverage was extensive, and Tao was hailed as a hero. But he didn't care about any of that. He stayed in the village, helping Naledi run her father's store. They didn't live together. They weren't even officially together. But they saw each other every day, slowly learning who they'd become in the years apart. The village watched with cautious hope as two broken people tried to piece themselves back together. The new baobab tree grew stronger. Tao cared for it religiously, watering it every morning. And one evening, 6 months after his return, he asked Naledi to meet him there. She arrived to find him standing beside the sapling, which had grown taller than both of them. He looked different now, the haunted look in his eyes finally beginning to fade. He held out the silver compass. I've been finding my way back to you for 10 years, he said. And I finally made it. But I don't want to make the same promise I made when we were kids. I'm not going to promise you a big house or wealth or anything grand. He got down on one knee in the dirt, and Naledi's breath caught. I'm not rich because of money, Tao continued, his voice steady and sure. I'm rich because I survived hell and found my way back to you. I'm rich because you're standing here, giving me a chance I don't deserve. Naledi, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that some promises, even when broken, can be mended? She looked down at him, at this man who'd fought through a decade of darkness to keep a childhood vow. She thought about all they'd lost and all they'd survived, and she thought about the woman she'd become, someone strong enough to forgive, but wise enough to make her own promises. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. But I have a promise too. No matter what comes, we face it together. No more secrets, no more separation, no more choosing pride over presence. They carved new initials into the young baobab tree, right above where the old ones had been. Their hands moved together, older and scarred, but still fitting perfectly. Then they did their secret handshake, laughing when they both stumbled over the steps they'd created as teenagers. The village celebrated their wedding 3 months later. It was small and simple, held under the growing baobab tree at sunset. Naledi wore her mother's dress. Tao wore a suit he'd bought with money honestly earned. And hanging from a branch of the young tree, catching the golden light, was the silver compass that had guided him home. As they said their vows, neither promised riches or perfect happiness. They promised truth, presence, and the courage to face whatever came next. Because they'd learned that some loves don't survive despite the obstacles, they survive because of them. Every scar, every year of pain, every moment of darkness had forged something stronger than the innocent promise 2 children had made under an ancient tree. They'd lost 10 years, but they'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that their love was worth fighting for, worth suffering for, worth coming home for. And as the sun set over the mountains Naledi had drawn as a child, they began the life they'd waited a lifetime to live. The compass pointed home. And finally, after a decade of wandering, they both knew exactly where that was.